Takže páni, sme tu, 84. relaxačný tréningový deň. Dneska sú klikožrutí 90, 80, 70, 60 a 50 klikožrutov. 84. Všetko sedí, všetko sa točí. Takže dneska zase boli veľmi biedný deň Ligy retardov. Nepodarilo sa mi presvedčiť z ani jedného, aby išiel odsýpať 2 jednotku na mid. A mal som 2 neúspešné zápasy, kde sa mi dvakrát nepodarilo skurvisynom presvedčiť, aby teda išli odsýpať 2 jednotku. Raz sa mi to nedalo presvedčiť na top, raz sa mi to nepodarilo presvedčiť na mid. Je to absolútne neúprosné. Tie choré, tupé ľudské hnoje je nereálne presvedčiť, aby išli odsýpať 2 jednotku. Proste ja si zoberiem svoju líniu, ja chcem ísť proti 2 a oni odmietajú ísť 2 proti 1. Odmietajú, nerozumiem tomu. Nerozumiem, prečo to robia. Ja im dávam ľahkú možnosť sa nafeedovať. Ja sám seba okreplujem, im dávam ľahkú možnosť sa nafeedovať. A oni ti povedia, nie, ja radšej prehrám. Nie, ja radšej prehrám. Neuveriteľné. Je to strašné, keď sa ľudia mentálne zaostali tupí sprostí hajzli. Oni radšej prehrajú. Ako keby mali byť. Dvaja v ľahkej línii, 2 jednotku. Tie kurvy radšej prehrajú. Ako keby mali odsypať ľahkú líniu, ľahko 2 jednotku, ľahkého žoviala. Tupe kokoty radšej prehrajú. Nič, ako som povedal, som nútený pikovať si tú spolnú líniu. Je to bohužiaľ, nedá sa to inak robiť. Nedá sa s tým nič robiť, situácia je aká je. 2 kokoty z dola v živote nepresvedčím, aby odsýpali 2 jednotku. V živote. Akákoľvek kombinácia 2 jednotky je pre 2 skurvené kokoty dole neprípustná. Ale ani jedného, stačilo by som jedného, aby som jedného presvedčil, jedného z tých kokotov. Ale ani jedného. To sú tupe čvárky hajzlo. Je to strašné, čo ľudia reprezentujú. Ja sa čudujem sám sebe, že sa to ešte pokúšam stále. Že stále si myslím, to je bohužiaľ, v živote. V živote je tupe kurvy nepôjdu na mid alebo na top. V živote. Ja som si myslel, že na mid pôjdu, že mid lane zoberú 2 kokoty, ale nope. To isté ako top. Oni chcú bať dole 2v2, oni chcú dole feedovať, chcú dole nažierať. A chcú prehrávať zápasy. Hovorím, pre tých kokotov nažieranie, skapínanie, pre to neznamená absolútne nič. Oni sú zvyknutí chodiť 1-8, 2-8, 3-8 a vyhrávať zápasy. Tupe sprosté kurvy sú zvyknuté byť kokotom a vyhrávať zápasy. Je to smutné. Je to, čo to je. Je to samozrejme tragické. Neskonalé. Tragické. Nedá sa s tým absolútne nič robiť. Tá mentálna degenerácia je primitív je príliš vysoká. Príliš vysoká. Sú to príliš veľký hajzli. Je to smutné, ale nespraví s tým nič. Ľudia sú čo ľudia sú. Raz a navždy sa s tým musím vyrovnať. A vtedy, keď som mal 8 výher v rade, myslím si, že to som mal Yellowbirdom, nie? To som mal Jelinom. Ako nemal som zatiaľ najväčšie prehy, čo mám, sú 4 v rade. Takže neboli nejaké dlhé losing streaky. Maximálne 4 prehy v rade boli. Áno, bol to Jelino, bol to Yellowbird. Z Yellowbirdom sa dokázal nezomierať a dominovať kokotov. Ale ako som hovoril, tretia vec bola defenzívna. Tretiu vec som stal v Wormoga. Tretiu vec som stal v Wormoga, no. Odlišne, že budem stať v Wormoga. Tretiu vec teda. Keď sa to osvedčovalo. Tretiu vec som stal v Wormoga. Teraz som sa dať Proteana. No budeme stavať tretiu vec naspäť v Wormoga. Budeme stavať naspäť v Wormoga tretiu vec. Dáva to movement speed, dáva to regeneráciu života. Toto tučné veci. Je to si drahšie, stojí to až 3100. 700. 1400. Tretia vec v Wormoge. No ale je rozhodnuté, urobíme to takto. Poviem, je to smutné, je to retardované, ľudia sú čo ľudia sú. Nereálne presvedčiť dve kurvy, aby išli na mid. Ako možno sa o to pokúsim, znova by som ukázal, čisto by som ukázal, akí sú ľudia primitíve zaostali hajzli. Ako im dávaš možnosť ľahko vyhrať zápas, ako im dávaš možnosť sa nafeedovať, byť tučný, odsýpať ľahko 2v jednotku a ako ti oni vždy jasne a tvrdo povedia nie, my radšej prehráme zápas, ako keď sme mali vyhrať zápas. Je to bohužiaľ, čo to je. Tu bude proste zaostalé retardované. Závazeného mozgu narušené. Chudáci ako žijú. Je to smutné, čo ľudia sú. To smutné, aký sa trpí. Kúpa sprosto sa ostal ľudská rasa skurvý synu. A ja som z toho stále šokovaný, ako je nereálne dohodnúť sa s tými kurvami. Je nereálne dohodnúť sa s dvomi kurvami, aby išli odsýpať za jednotku. To je nereálne. Tí ľudia sú tu úplne proste psychicky náročené kokoty. Ľudia sú, čo ľudia sú. Mentálne zaostali túpi sprostí hajzli. Je to strašne smutné, čo ľudská sa reprezentuje. Je to strašne smutné, aký sú zaostali. Čo boli, no.
Lady Diana was her biographer, and now this gentleman, Mr. Carson, with Vladimir Putin. It's a great, courageous, and courage to go into your opponent or whom is considered to be an opponent. You can put an embargo on oil, you can put embargo on gas, but you can put an embargo on freedom of speech. Mr. Qasim, great honor for me to have you here today. I'll shoot because I have a lot of questions and very limited time. Basic question. Why you looked for this interview? Why with Putin? And why now?
Well, I'll start. Thank you very much for asking me, and thank you very much for having us here, one of my favorite countries in the world. I'll start in reverse order. Why now? Well, I've been trying for 3 years to do this interview. The U.S. government prevented me from doing it by spying on my text messages and leaking them to the New York Times. And that spooked the Russian government into canceling the interview. So I've been trying to do this, but my country's intel services were working against me illegally, and that enraged me because I'm an American citizen, I'm 54, I pay my taxes, I obey the law, and there was no expectation in the America that I grew up in that my government and its intel services, NSA and CIA, which were always outwardly focused on our foreign enemies, would be turned inward against American citizens. And I'm shocked by that, and I'm infuriated by that. And so once I discovered that that was happening, and I confirmed it was happening, and they admitted that they did it, then I was totally determined, monomaniacally dedicated to doing this interview, not simply because I want to know what Vladimir Putin is like and what he thinks about a war that is resetting the world and really gravely damaging my country's economy, but also because they told me I couldn't on the basis of illegitimate means and for no really clearly stated justification, and I thought that can't stand. I want to live in a free country. I was born in one, and I'm going to do whatever small thing I can do to maintain, the society that I love.
You are known to be pro-Republican Party, right wing of Republican Party. This is what they claim. They said first you've been a Democrat,
That's not true.
Became a Republican. Okay. Or you are known to be pro-Trump, anti-Biden. What is truthful in this? And you went to Putin because you are pro-Trump and anti-Biden?
My views are not very interesting. I'm not sure how I'd characterize them. They're changing as quickly as the world itself is changing. And as a matter of principle, I think that, that your views should change when the evidence changes, and assumptions that you had in the past are proven wrong. That has happened to me virtually every month of my life. If you pay close enough attention, you can rate your own performance, just as if you're betting on sports. I lost that one, and when you do, when it turns out that the things you thought were true were lies, you should admit it. So what are my views? I'm not certain. Tell the truth is my main view, and I plan to do that to the best of my ability. So Trump played no role in this whatsoever. There's obviously an election in my country coming to fruition in November. I have no idea what's going to happen. I think that the current administration is very obviously incompetent, and the president is senile. That's not an attack. Everyone knows it. It has now been confirmed, I would say, this week in the report that you're all familiar with. But and that's very sad, but it had sort of nothing to do with the interview. I wanted to interview Putin because he's the leader of a country that the U.S. government is sort of at war with, though not in a declared way.
Sir, you know your President Biden well.
Yes, I do.
You've been working in several media organizations from PBS, CNBC, NBC, Fox News, CNN, and you've been covering this field well, and you know the American politicians. And now you've been following Putin, and you did a very lengthy interview with this gentleman. And for sure, to interview him, you did your homework and you did your research. Comparing the culture, the competence between Vladimir Putin and Biden, how do you see the two men now running the world?
If this were boxing, the fight would be called by the medic. So, and I say that as an American, and I don't have another passport. I don't plan to ever leave my country. My family's been there hundreds of years, and I love it. I am a patriotic American. And I grieve when I see that the president is non compos mentis, and that in my country, it is considered very rude to say that. And you sort of wonder, how did you get to a place where you have an incompetent president who's driven not simply the standard of living, but life expectancy downward, and no one feels free to say that. That's not a political observation. It's a statement of fact, which is provable empirically. And the most radicalizing thing I would just say, for me, in the 8 days I spent in Moscow, was not simply the leader of the country, who of course is impressive. It's the largest landmass in the world. And it's wildly diverse, linguistically, culturally, religiously. It's hard to run a country like that for 24 years, whether you like it or not. So an incapable person couldn't do that. He is very capable, and many of you know him, and you know that. What was radicalizing, very shocking, and very disturbing for me was the city of Moscow, where I'd never been, the biggest city in Europe, 13 million people. And it is so much nicer than any city in my country. I had no idea. My father spent a lot of time there in the 80s when he worked for the US government and barely had electricity. And now it is so much cleaner and safer and prettier aesthetically. Its architecture, its food, its service, than any country, city in the United States that you have to, and this is not ideological. How did that happen? How did that happen? And at a certain point, I don't think the average person cares as much about abstractions as about the concrete reality of his life. And if you can't use your subway, for example, as many people are afraid to in New York City because it's too dangerous, you have to sort of wonder, like, isn't that the ultimate measure of leadership? And that's true, by the way, it's radicalizing for an American to go to Moscow, I didn't know that, I've learned it this week, to Singapore, to Tokyo, to Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Because these cities, no matter how we're told they're run and on what principles they're run, are wonderful places to live. That don't have rampant inflation, where you're not going to get raped.
Sir,
And so,
excuse me.
what is that?
Excuse me. Are you anti-American model?
No, I am the most pro-American. So I'm 54. I was born in 1969. I grew up in a country that had cities like Moscow and Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Singapore and Tokyo. And we no longer have them. And what I have discovered is that's a voluntary choice. As inflation is, as you heard in that fascinating last panel, inflation is the product of choices made mostly by the central bank, not exclusively, but by policymakers. Crime, same. You don't have to have crime, actually. If you don't put, my children don't smoke marijuana at the breakfast table. Why? Because I won't allow them. It's very simple, it's a short conversation. No. And you can run your country the same way. We're not gonna put up with that, so don't do it, and people understand that. Filth, graffiti, Paris, one of my favorite cities, New York, one of my favorite cities, are filthy. And part of the reason they're filthy is because people spray paint obscenities on buildings and no one cleans it up. So that encourages more people to do the same. And our policymakers, for some reason, don't notice this. London, another one of my favorite cities. You see English girls begging for drugs on the sidewalk. And I thought to myself, if I'm Boris Johnson, who briefly and very badly ran that country, I would ask myself, like, wait a second, my countrymen are begging for drugs on the street. Maybe I should do something about that. But no, he'll show up and give some speech about Ukraine and how we need to send, more cluster bombs to the brave Ukrainians. What are you doing?
You mentioned Ukraine. By talking to this gentleman, President Putin, for this lengthy interview, my question is, did you have coffee with him? Did you have any off-the-record discussion before the interview?
After.
Did you feel during the interview or before or after that this man can make or is willing to do a historical compromise, number one, on the status of the world with the West, and number two, about Ukraine? Is he a compromiser, yes or no?
Of course, right? I mean, leaders of every country on the planet, other than maybe the United States during the unipolar period, are forced by the nature of their jobs to compromise. Compromise is part of it, that's what diplomacy is. And he's among those. His position is clearly hardening. Russia has been rebuffed by the West. I mean, Vladimir Putin, I'm not flacking for Putin. I'm an American. I'm not going to live in Russia. I don't love Vladimir Putin. I'm stating the facts. He asked Bill Clinton to join NATO. He tried to make a missile deal.
He mentioned this in the interview.
He did, that's correct. And he's mentioned it in other forums as well. And NATO said, no, we don't want you. Now, if the point of NATO, the point of NATO originally, of course, the post-war goal of NATO was to keep the Russians, the Soviets.
Tu bez proste ľudské hnoje. Dobre, páni. Skončili sme, ak to vôbec nejaký pálení sú, ak vôbec nejaký pálení ešte existujú, väčšinou si všetko túpec proste hnoje. Ale dobre, 84. tréningový deň je za nami. Bolo 12.2.2024, skončili sme 19.21, 7 trval 25 minút a 35 sekúnd.